All right, now to implement the client-side validation, for the input fields that are required, I'm going to apply the required attribute of HTML5. So here's our make dropdown list. I'm going to apply this required attribute here. Now, next to this input field, I'm going to render a div that would contain our error message. This div should have two classes. One is alert and the other is alert-danger. These are both bootstrap classes. Now tab, the error is please specify the make. Now we want to render this error message only if the input field is not valid. How do we do that? Well, first we need to get a reference to the control object behind this input field. Just to refresh your memory, when we build forms with Angular, there's always a control object associated with each input field. This control object knows whether this input field has been touched. It knows whether the value is changed, which we say if it's dirty. It knows if this input field is valid or not. And it also gives us the current value stored in this input field. Now we can create these control objects in code, and then we refer to those kind of forms as reactive forms, or we can let Angular create these control objects for us. So here we are using a template-driven form, and whenever we apply this ng-model directive and the name attribute to an input field, Angular creates a control object under the hood. Now I want to get a reference to that control object. So here we need to use a template variable. So let's call it make, and we set it to ng-model. When Angular sees this, it will set this make variable to the control object that is linked to this input field. Now, back in our div, here we use ng-if. We want to render this. If make is touched and make is not valid. Okay, let's test it. So initially we don't have the error message. If I touch the input field and then go away, I get the error message. If I select a value, the error message disappears. Once again, if I set it to a blank item, we get the error message. Now I'm going to apply the exact same technique on the model dropdown list, as well as contact name and contact phone, because these are the required fields in our form. The others are optional. Now to save time, I'm not going to do them in this video, so I'm going to pause the recording. You can do them on your own. But let me show you one more thing before we finish this lecture. I want to prevent the user from posting the form until all the required fields are filled out. So I want to enable this submit button only if the form is valid. Once again, we need a template variable. So on the form element, here I'm going to declare a variable, call it f, and set it to ng form. So note the difference. On the form element, we use ng form. On input fields, we use ng model. And with this, we get access to the underlying object that we can use to check the status of this form. Now on the bottom, I'm going to use attribute binding and disable this button if f is not valid. Let's test it. So initially this button is disabled. Now if I select a make, the button is enabled. Beautiful. So go ahead and apply the client-side validation on model, contact name, and contact phone. In the next lecture, we're going to look at error handling.